Let us now put the spotlight on some of the pressures parents face when raising a child with challenges. We take a look at some of the difficulties of raising an atypical child and some of the tools and the solutions that caregivers can actually adopt to assist on this unfamiliar and often tough journey. To help us discuss this further, we are joined by clinical psychologist and director of research at Bellavista S.H.A.R.E, Dr. Natalie Solomon. A very good morning to you, Dr. Solomon. Thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with understanding what the term atypical child means.
Absolutely. So the term atypical child is commonly used to describe individuals who have some features that make their patterns of growth or their ways of thinking, perceiving or feeling or their ways of behaving and interacting with others not what we usually expect. So their course of development is different to a neurotypical child. So this can be developmental delays, this can be learning difficulties, physical differences or sensory-based differences. That's typically what we refer to when we talk about an atypical child.
What are some of the behavioral patterns and telltale signs that parents can actually pick up that their child may indeed be atypical?
So it will vary significantly depending on the situation. But maybe it might be that their learning takes longer than perhaps for others. It might be that they have many meltdowns or kind of behavioral outbursts, or that their anxiety levels in terms of interacting with others just seem much greater than for other children. But of course, there's huge variability in terms of the atypical child.
Now let's talk about these challenges that some parents face when raising an atypical child. What are some of them?
Okay, so raising an atypical child is loaded with stress. I think there's a lot of worry about the future. There's a lot of struggle in terms of managing difficult behaviors. There's overtaxed resources, whether that be financial or emotional. Often it might require specific school placement or therapy appointments. And many times within the family, there's a lot of disagreement that happens between parents who have a different idea of how the child should be managed. And this results in a lot of exhaustion, isolation. It can create enormous sadness and distress within parents.
And how do you as a parent support yourself and your child on this unfamiliar and often difficult journey?
So I think it begins with understanding that self-care is essential, that it's not a nice to have, but it's a need to have. So I think it begins with understanding your own emotional responses and putting in supports to help you with that. Also, in terms of building a community, that it can often feel like a very isolated experience. And it's really important that people feel like they can connect with other people who are having similar types of experiences and learn from each other, or just a space to share one's burden. Often parents have a lot of burnout. So again, it's around back to basics, looking at exercise, creating support structures around oneself, and then humor, working on one's relationship with one's partner, exercise. So really back to self-compassion and self-care. That is absolutely critical in managing a very stressful situation.
It is often said that having an atypical child can trigger emotions that are hardwired in all of us, such as denial, such as fear, such as, I would say, bargaining with fate, which is very, very important, and as well as isolation and depression. Talk to us more about these, Dr. Solomon.
So absolutely. I think typically parents follow a course or a trajectory of responses. It's not always linear, so one might move between different phases. But the typical phases that we experience or that we notice are initially denial. So that's a defense mechanism that protects us from emotions that are just too big. And that is kind of burying one's head in the sand, and that this is not true, this isn't the situation, people have misunderstood. Then we often need to push out into kind of a more activating behavior.
Yes.
Sometimes this can be anger. And with anger, it's often a sense of people have gotten this wrong, or people misunderstand me, and often it can be strangers or teachers or family or friends or doctors that become the target of parents' anger. And hopefully not the child. That can happen as well, where because the child feels so difficult to manage, one feels enormous anger towards them. But one would need to really work really hard with that to try and mitigate that kind of a response. And then parents move into kind of a cognitive mode of trying to find solutions. And they turn to Google, or they turn to multiple professionals. They look at special diets, medication, different research. And this can be very helpful, but one has to do it in a tempered way, because often there are con artists that will give you solutions to issues that are not necessarily solutions. So one has to enter that space with a bit of a wearisome attitude. And then there can be enormous shame. There can be enormous isolation. Sometimes parents feel, is this something I caused? Is this something I did when I was pregnant? Or is this something that my child might have inherited from me? And that creates a profound sense of isolation and really difficult for us to access support when we're isolated. And then hopefully we get to a space of acceptance. And acceptance is not a full stop. You kind of get to acceptance, and then it's a revolving door where you go back to other spaces of bargaining again, anger again. But acceptance is a space that's not necessarily enjoying or being happy with the situation, but it's recognizing that it comes with specific real challenges, but that there are also beautiful parts to it that one can be enjoyed, but one really has to work at finding that.
Now, Dr. Solomon, speak to us about the growing body of research that now confirms that parents' moods can actually affect the way that they care for their children, and how this relates to atypical children.
Absolutely. So we know that there's something called emotional contagion. Our emotions are catchy. So the way we feel filters down to our children, and it has a huge impact on them, whether it's spoken or unspoken. Again, as parents, we're the captains of the ship, and how we respond to the world and our children is going to impact on our children's experiences of themselves. So it's critically important that we really do understand our own emotional responses with compassion, and that we try and respond in a way where we can actually maximize intervention, or maximize trying to see things in a positive light, not toxic positivity where we kind of negate the things that are hard, but with a sense of optimism and hope for what can we do, how can we manage this meaningfully.
And I think it's very important to remember that differences in behavior do not always reflect, differences in development. Thank you for making that point, Dr. Solomon. We do appreciate your time.
Great, thank you.
That was clinical psychologist Dr. Natalie Solomon, and we've been in conversation with her about some of the major pressures and difficulties parents face in raising an atypical child.